The motel room was barely 8 square meters, but it felt even smaller at 3 in the morning. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burnt electronics, a smell that clung to my skin and hair no matter how many showers I took. The only light came from the sickly blue glow of a computer screen, flickering in a never-ending boot loop, and the dying whine of a fan that sounded like it was gasping for its last breath. I sat hunched over the desk, shoulders aching, eyes burning as if someone had rubbed chili powder into them. My hands shook as I gripped the screwdriver, trying to focus on the tangle of wires and circuit boards in front of me, but my mind kept drifting, always drifting. I'd lost count of how many nights I hadn't slept. Maybe 3 in a row, maybe 5. It didn't matter. The days and nights had blurred together into one endless loop of work, exhaustion, and worry. I was running on caffeine, adrenaline, and the constant, gnawing fear that if I stopped for even a second, everything would collapse. The debts wouldn't wait. The interest wouldn't pause. My parents' needs wouldn't disappear just because I was tired. I was the only thing holding it all together, and I knew it. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. In less than 3 hours, I'd have to be at Mr. Ellis Davenport's mansion, ready to start my shift as his caregiver. After that, a cold shower, a stale piece of bread, and then straight to the office building for my janitor job. Then food deliveries, then back here, fixing computers for customers who barely remembered my name. Every dollar I earned was already spent before it hit my account. Debts, utilities, medicine for my father, groceries for my mother. There was never enough, and there was never a break. I rubbed my eyes, trying to force away the fatigue, but it was like trying to wipe away a stain that had soaked too deep. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. My head spun with the kind of dizziness that made the walls seem to pulse in and out of focus. I told myself I just needed to finish this one repair, just one more, and then maybe I could close my eyes for a few minutes. But I knew it was a lie. There was always one more thing, one more crisis, one more demand. The phone rang, slicing through the silence like a knife. The ringtone was shrill, insistent, and instantly my heart started pounding. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. My mother's number was burned into my brain, a Pavlovian trigger for anxiety. I hesitated, staring at the phone as it vibrated on the desk, the screen lighting up the darkroom. I already knew what she would say. It was always the same: money, emergencies, disappointment. But I couldn't ignore it. I never could. I picked up, forcing my voice to sound steady. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, urgent, already on the edge of panic. "Amir, you need to come home right now. Something terrible has happened." My stomach twisted. I felt the familiar rush of dread, the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I tried to ask what was wrong, but she was already talking over me, her words tumbling out in a frantic stream. I caught fragments: money, danger, your father now. My mind raced, trying to piece together what new disaster had landed on our doorstep. As she spoke, my vision narrowed, the edges of the room blurring. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, trying to steady myself. The panic attack hit hard and fast, a tidal wave of fear and helplessness. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but all I could do was sit there, paralyzed, listening to my mother's voice echoing in my ears. I never imagined that by sunrise, my entire life would be turned upside down. If I close my eyes, I can still remember the first time I realized my family was different. Not in the way that made you proud, but in the way that made you shrink a little smaller every time someone asked about your home life. I was 19, standing in the cramped kitchen of our rundown house on the edge of town, watching my father slam his fist on the table as the football game blared in the background. My mother hovered nearby, her lips painted a garish red, scrolling through her phone and sighing dramatically every few minutes. The air was thick with tension, the kind that never really left, no matter how many windows you opened. Back then, I still believed things could get better. I was in my first year of college, majoring in computer engineering, dreaming of a future where I could build something that mattered. I imagined a life where I could come home to laughter, to warmth, to parents who asked about my day instead of how much money I could send. But reality had a way of grinding those dreams down, one unpaid bill at a time. My father, Easton Beckett, was a man of big opinions and even bigger tempers. He'd once worked as a foreman at a local factory, but after a shouting match with his boss, he was fired and never found steady work again. He spent his days glued to the TV, yelling at politicians and referees, convinced the world was out to get him. When the unemployment checks ran out, he turned to gambling, first at the racetrack, then online, then with loan sharks who didn't care about sob stories. Every loss was someone else's fault. Every win was a sign that his luck was about to turn. It never did. My mother, Ivy, was a different kind of storm. She was sharp, calculating, always looking for an angle. She loved to show off, posting photos of herself with knockoff designer bags, telling the neighbors her son worked for a big corporation. She never asked if I'd eaten, only how much I could send this month. Her love was conditional, measured in wire transfers and gifts she could brag about. When things went wrong, she'd cry and wail, blaming everyone but herself, until I caved and promised to fix it. I tried to hold on to my dreams, but the weight of their needs pressed down on me, heavier with each passing year. The first time I took a job outside of school, it was supposed to be temporary, a way to help with groceries, maybe pay for my textbooks. But one job became 2, then 3. I worked nights at a gas station, weekends cleaning offices, and still tried to keep up with my classes. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that if I worked hard enough, things would turn around. But the rough patch never ended. The bills kept piling up: rent, utilities, my father's mounting gambling debts, my mother's shopping sprees. Every time I thought I'd caught up, something else would break: the car, the fridge, my father's health. I watched my friends go out, travel, fall in love, while I counted every dollar, every hour of sleep I lost. I started skipping classes, then entire semesters, telling myself I'd go back when things were better. But things never got better. The worst part was the way hope slowly drained out of me. At first, I believed I could save us. I'd stay up late, running numbers, making plans, convinced that if I just worked a little harder, took on one more shift, I could pull us out of the hole. But the hole only got deeper. My father borrowed more, lost more, and the loan sharks started calling the house at all hours. My mother's demands grew sharper, her disappointment more cutting. "You're the eldest son," she'd say, her voice cold as ice. "It's your duty to take care of us. Who else will do it?" I tried to talk to them, to explain that I couldn't do it all, that I needed help. But my words bounced off them like rain on stone. My father would shout, accusing me of disrespect, of being ungrateful for all he'd done. My mother would cry, telling me I was breaking her heart, that I didn't care about family. Guilt became my constant companion, a shadow that followed me everywhere. I remember the day I realized my dreams were slipping away for good. I was 21, sitting in the back room of the gas station on my break, staring at a textbook I hadn't opened in weeks. My phone buzzed, another message from my mother, asking for money. I looked at the numbers in my bank account, did the math, and realized I'd have to skip meals again to make it work. I felt something inside me crack, a small, silent fracture that would only grow with time. But I kept going. I took on a 4th job, fixing computers for neighbors and anyone who'd pay. I learned to live on 2 hours of sleep, to ignore the ache in my bones, the constant headache that never quite went away. I told myself I was strong, that I could handle it, that this was what family meant. But the truth was, I was drowning, and no one was coming to save me. There were moments, late at night, when I'd let myself remember what hope felt like. I'd think about the life I'd wanted, the degree, the job, the chance to build something of my own. I'd imagine a world where my parents were proud of me for who I was, not just for what I could provide. But those moments were fleeting, chased away by the next crisis, the next demand. The weight of duty became my identity. I stopped thinking about what I wanted, stopped dreaming about the future. My life shrank to a single purpose: keep the family afloat, no matter the cost. I told myself it was noble, that sacrifice was a kind of love. But deep down, I knew I was losing myself, piece by piece, to a burden that was never really mine to carry. Looking back, I wonder how long I could have kept going. How many more years I would have given away, how much more of myself I would have lost, if something hadn't finally broken. But at the time, all I could see was the next bill, the next shift, the next desperate plea from my mother. I was trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, duty and despair, and I couldn't see a way out. I remember the day the debt became mine as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was the kind of sweltering summer afternoon that made the air shimmer above the cracked pavement, the kind where even the flies seemed too tired to move. I was 22, running on 3 hours of sleep and a cup of gas station coffee, when my phone rang. My mother's voice was shrill, panicked, and insistent. "Amir, come home right now. Something terrible has happened." I dropped everything, my shift, my plans, my last thread of hope for a quiet day, and raced to the house. The second I pushed open the door, I knew this wasn't just another argument or overdue bill. 3 men I'd never seen before stood in the living room, tattoos snaking up their arms, black shirts stretched tight over muscle. One of them tapped a baseball bat against the floor, the sound echoing through the house like a warning. My father cowered in the kitchen corner, his face ashen, while my mother clutched her head, sobbing, "Son, save us." The men were there to collect $50,000, money my father had borrowed from loan sharks, supposedly to invest in stocks, but I knew better. It was always gambling, always another sure thing that never panned out. Compound interest had turned the debt into nearly $100,000. The leader, a man with a scar running down his cheek, smirked and pointed at my father. "If you don't pay today, don't blame me for what happens next." I looked at my parents, my father shaking, my mother begging like she was about to die, and felt something inside me snap. I couldn't let them get hurt, not even after everything. I stepped forward, my voice trembling. "Let me. I'll pay it for them." The men laughed, sizing me up, but when I told them I had 2 steady jobs and could make payments, they agreed. I signed the contract in my own name, the ink barely dry before the weight settled on my shoulders. 15% monthly interest. No extensions. No excuses. From that moment, my life was no longer my own. Every decision, every waking hour, was dictated by the debt. I picked up extra shifts, took on more jobs, cut out every luxury. Even a 25-cent pack of instant noodles became 2 meals. I stopped seeing friends, stopped answering calls that weren't from work or my parents. My world shrank to a single, suffocating point: survive long enough to make the next payment. The sleepless nights became routine. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding as I calculated how much I owed, how much I'd earned, how much I still needed. The numbers never added up. I'd get up before dawn, drag myself to Mr. Ellis's mansion, change his sheets, bathe him, cook his breakfast, all while my mind raced with worry. After my shift, I'd rush home, shower, eat whatever scraps I could find, then head to the office building to mop floors and empty trash cans. The bleach fumes burned my nose, but I barely noticed. I was too tired to care. By the time I finished my janitor shift, my body felt like it was made of lead. But there was no rest. I'd drive for a food delivery app, my old car rattling through the night, sweat soaking my back because the AC had died long ago. I'd deliver meals to people who barely looked at me, then return to the motel and fix computers until the sky started to lighten. Most days, I got 2 hours of sleep if I was lucky. The exhaustion seeped into everything. My hands shook so badly I'd drop screws, crawling on the cold floor for an hour to find them. My eyes burned, my head spun, my body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. But I didn't dare stop. I didn't dare complain. Every dollar I earned flew straight into debts, utilities, and medicine for my parents. My father, still unemployed, spent his days yelling at the TV, while my mother posted photos of herself with fake designer bags, bragging to the neighbors about her successful son. They never once asked if I was tired, if I'd eaten, or how many hours I'd slept. They only ever said one thing, the sentence I'd heard so many times I wanted to scream: "You're the son. It's your duty to support your parents." Every time my mother's number lit up my phone, my stomach knotted. I already knew what was coming. "Son, we're short on living expenses this month. Send another $500, okay? Or Dad's back hurts. Buy him that $200 joint supplement." I gritted my teeth and sent it, down to the very last cent in my account, because I was still stupid enough to believe that one day they'd look at me and say thank you. But that day never came. Instead, I watched myself disappear, piece by piece. I stopped recognizing the man in the mirror, dark circles under his eyes, sunken cheeks, hair falling out in clumps from stress. I became a ghost, haunting my own life, existing only to keep the machine running. My dreams, my ambitions, my sense of self, all sacrificed on the altar of duty. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd ask myself how much more I could give before I broke. How many more years I could survive like this, running on empty, with no end in sight. The answer was always the same: just a little longer. Just until the next payment. Just until my parents were safe. But deep down, I knew I was trapped, caught in a cycle that would never end unless someone, finally gave out. And I was terrified that someone would be me. The years that followed became a blur of exhaustion, a relentless cycle that ground me down until I could barely remember who I'd been before. My life was measured in shifts and paychecks, in the number of hours I could squeeze out of a day before my body finally gave out. I became a machine, programmed to work, to endure, to survive. Each morning began before the sun had even considered rising. My alarm would blare at 5 a.m., and I'd drag myself out of bed, every muscle aching as if I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I'd splash cold water on my face, force down a piece of stale bread, and head out into the still dark streets of Phoenix. The city was quiet at that hour, the air heavy with the promise of another scorching day. I'd arrive at Mr. Ellis Davenport's mansion by 6, my uniform pressed, my smile practiced. Mr. Ellis was 80, frail and sharp-tongued, but beneath his gruff exterior, I sensed a loneliness that mirrored my own. My job was to care for him, change his diapers, bathe him, cook his meals, listen to his stories from a world that seemed impossibly distant from mine. I moved through the motions with gentle hands and a patient voice, even when my body screamed for rest. Sometimes, as I spoon-fed him breakfast, I'd catch my reflection in the polished silverware, eyes bloodshot, skin sallow, a young man aging before his time. By 2 in the afternoon, my shift would end. I'd drive home, windows down because the air conditioning in my car had died years ago, sweat soaking through my shirt. I'd take a quick shower, the cold water barely enough to jolt me awake, then scarf down whatever food I could find, usually a half-eaten sandwich or a cup of instant noodles. There was no time for rest. By 5, I was at the office building downtown, mop and bucket in hand, ready to scrub away the day's grime. The janitor job was mindless, but it paid just enough to keep the lights on. I'd move from floor to floor, the smell of bleach burning my nostrils, my hands raw from chemicals. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of office workers laughing in the break room, their lives so far removed from mine it felt like watching a movie through a fogged window. I wondered if they ever thought about the people who cleaned up after them, if they ever noticed the tired young man emptying their trash cans. I doubted it. 9 o'clock would come, and I'd clock out, my legs trembling from hours on my feet. But the day wasn't over. I'd slide behind the wheel of my battered car and open the food delivery app, praying for enough orders to make the night worthwhile. The city transformed after dark, neon signs flickering, the air thick with the scent of fried food and gasoline. I'd weave through traffic, my phone buzzing with directions, my mind numb with fatigue. Sometimes, I'd deliver to houses that looked like palaces, the kind of places I'd only seen on TV. I'd hand over bags of takeout to people who barely glanced at me, their eyes fixed on their phones, their voices impatient. By 11, I'd return to my motel room, the walls closing in around me. But there was still work to do. I'd set up my makeshift repair station, an old desk littered with motherboards, tangled cables, and half-assembled laptops. My fingers would fumble with tiny screws, my vision blurring as I tried to focus on the task at hand. Sometimes, I'd nod off mid-repair, jerking awake when a screwdriver slipped from my grasp. I'd force myself to keep going, telling myself I just needed to finish one more job, earn one more dollar. Most nights, I got 2, maybe 3 hours of sleep. My body was in constant pain, a dull ache in my back, a throbbing in my temples, a heaviness in my chest that never quite went away. I started losing weight, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. My hair thinned, my skin broke out in stress rashes. I caught every cold, every flu, my immune system too weak to fight back. But I kept going. I had to. My parents never saw any of this. To them, I was just a voice on the other end of the phone, a bank account to be tapped whenever they needed something. My father would call, his voice slurred from drink, demanding money for his bad back or another investment opportunity. My mother would text me photos of things she wanted, new shoes, a fancy blender, a trip to Vegas with her friends. If I hesitated, even for a moment, the guilt would come pouring in. You're the son. It's your duty. We sacrificed everything for you. The truth was, I couldn't remember a single sacrifice they'd made for me. There were days when I wanted to scream, to tell them how hard I was working, how close I was to breaking. But I never did. I swallowed my anger, my resentment, my pain. I told myself I was strong enough to handle it, that things would get better if I just kept pushing. But hope became harder to hold onto with each passing month. I watched as my friends moved on with their lives, graduating, getting married, starting families. I saw their photos on social media, smiling in places I'd never been, living lives I could only dream of. I stopped responding to their messages, too ashamed to admit how far I'd fallen behind. I became a ghost, haunting the edges of my own existence. The worst part was the loneliness. I was surrounded by people every day, patients, co-workers, customers, but I'd never felt more alone. No one asked how I was doing. No one noticed when I was gone. I started to wonder if I even mattered, if my life had any value beyond the money I could send home. As the years dragged on, the routine became a prison. I stopped dreaming, stopped hoping for anything more than survival. My world shrank to a series of obligations, a never-ending list of things I had to do to keep everyone else happy. I lost sight of who I was, of what I wanted. I became a shadow, flickering at the edges of my own life, waiting for something, anything, to change. But nothing changed. The debts never shrank. The gratitude never came. And with every passing day, I felt myself slipping further away, lost in the endless grind of sacrifice. It happened on a night like any other, or so I thought. I was driving through the city, the clock on my dashboard blinking 10:30 p.m., my last food delivery order of the night rattling in the passenger seat. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes every breath feel like work. My eyelids drooped, my mind foggy from days, weeks, without real rest. I told myself I just needed to make it home, just a few more minutes, and then I could collapse for a couple of hours before the next shift began. But my body had other plans. One moment, I was gripping the steering wheel, fighting to keep my eyes open. The next, the world spun violently, the streetlights blurring into streaks of white and gold. I heard the screech of tires, the blaring of horns, and then the hot, gritty taste of asphalt as my face hit the pavement. Everything went black. When I woke, I was staring up at a sterile white ceiling, the harsh glare of fluorescent lights stabbing into my skull. The sharp, chemical scent of antiseptic filled my nose. My left arm burned from an 4-needle, my right arm numb and tingling. Panic surged through me as I tried to sit up, only to be met with a wave of dizziness that sent me crashing back onto the thin hospital mattress. A nurse appeared at my side, her face kind but tired. She checked the machines, her hands gentle as she adjusted the 4. My voice came out as a rasp. "What happened to me?" She looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern. "You collapsed in the street. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, irregular heartbeat. You're lucky someone called 911 when they did." I tried to process her words, but my mind was already racing ahead. Hospital bills. Missed shifts. Who would cover for me at Mr. Ellis's? How would I pay the rent this month? The panic rose in my chest, squeezing my lungs until I could barely breathe. The doctor came in, his expression grave. He shone a light in my eyes, checked my reflexes, then sighed. "You need to stay here for at least 5 to 7 days. For fluids, monitoring. If you keep going like this, you could die." 5 to 7 days. I almost laughed. Where was I supposed to get the money for that? Who would pay the bills, the debts, the endless stream of expenses that never let up? I lay there, staring at the ceiling, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes and running backward into my hair. I hadn't even dared to think about how I would tell my parents. But I didn't have to. The hospital said they'd called my family. I waited, telling myself they'd come. That my mother would rush in, worried, that my father would at least call to check on me. I spun excuses for them in my mind. Maybe they were busy, maybe they couldn't get away, maybe they were just waiting for visiting hours. But the hours passed, and no one came. Not the first day, not the second. I signed my own forms, dragged myself in a wheelchair to the cafeteria to buy the cheapest meal I could find, brushed my teeth with shaking hands in the shared bathroom. One day, I spiked a fever, and a kind nurse brought me a cup of warm water and a Tylenol. She asked, "Where's your family?" I just gave her a crooked smile. "They're busy." On the 4th day, my phone finally rang. My mother's number flashed on the screen. My heart leapt, hope flaring for the first time in days. I answered, my voice weak. "Mom, I'm in the hospital. Why haven't you and Dad come to see me?" There was no concern in her voice, not even a hint of worry. She went straight to the point, her tone cold and businesslike. "Amir, handle the hospital bills yourself, okay? Get better quickly so you can go back to work. End of the month, the interest is due. Plus, Dad needs his medicine. Don't make me remind you." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up, the words stuck somewhere between anger and heartbreak. All I managed was a choked, "Yes, I understand." She hung up without another word. I let the phone fall onto my chest and stared at the ceiling, the tears coming faster now, soaking the pillow beneath my head. Not from physical pain, but from the sudden, excruciating clarity. In my parents' eyes, I had never been their son. I was just a walking ATM, a money-making tool, a buffer between them and the consequences of their own choices. Was I nothing more than an ATM to them? The question echoed in my mind, louder than the beeping of the heart monitor, sharper than the ache in my chest. I lay there, utterly alone, the weight of years of sacrifice and disappointment pressing down on me until I thought I might suffocate. For the first time, I let myself wonder if I would ever be enough for them, or if I was only ever enough as long as I kept giving, and giving, and giving, until there was nothing left of me at all. I was still paying off the hospital bill in small, painful installments when the news broke. It came not from my parents, but from a neighbor's offhand message, one of those texts you almost think is a joke until the words start to sink in. Congrats to your folks. Saw the news. Big lottery win. Must be a relief for you, right? I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my mind tried to make sense of them. Lottery win. My parents. I scrolled through social media, my hands trembling, and there it was, a photo of my mother, beaming in a brand new dress, holding up a giant check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. My father stood beside her, grinning, his arms slung around her shoulders. The caption read, "Turning a new page in life, starting today. Thank you, God." For a moment, I felt nothing but stunned disbelief. Relief flickered in my chest, tentative and fragile. Maybe, finally, the nightmare was over. Maybe I could breathe again, sleep again, live again. Maybe my parents would pay off the debts, help me get back on my feet, thank me for all the years I'd carried them. I let myself imagine it, my mother calling to say, "You did enough, Amir. Come home. Rest." My father, for once, looking at me with pride instead of expectation. But the call never came. Days passed, and the only messages I received were the usual demands for money, as if nothing had changed. I waited, telling myself they were busy, overwhelmed, still processing their good fortune. I tried to believe that, after everything, they wouldn't forget me. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from my mother's social media. She'd posted a photo of a long table draped in white linen, red wine sparkling in crystal glasses, plates of lobster and steak, a 3-tier cake at the center. My parents stood at the head of the table, dressed in new clothes, surrounded by neighbors and relatives, all raising their glasses in a toast. The caption hit me like a slap, celebrating new beginnings with everyone who matters most. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, a sick feeling rising in my throat. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even been told. I scrolled through the comments, congratulations, heart emojis, people tagging each other and laughing about the party. Not a single mention of me. It was as if I'd never existed. I tried to call, but my mother didn't answer. My father's phone went straight to voicemail. I sat in my tiny motel room, the walls closing in, the air thick with the smell of old takeout and burnt plastic, and felt a cold, hollow ache settle in my chest. I told myself there had to be a mistake, that they'd call tomorrow, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. The next day, I drove to their house, desperate for answers. The front door was wide open, colored lights flashing, music thumping so loud I could feel it in my bones. The yard was packed with people, neighbors, relatives, friends I hadn't seen in years. Laughter and chatter filled the air, the smell of expensive food and alcohol wafting out into the street. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my keys so tightly my knuckles turned white, and tried to summon the courage to go inside. When I finally stepped through the door, the noise hit me like a wave. My father was in the center of the room, face flushed from drink, shouting, "Thank you all for coming. Cheers." My mother stood beside him, her arm linked with a neighbor's, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in years. No one noticed me at first. I was just another shadow in the crowd. I made my way toward them, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. When my mother finally saw me, her smile faltered for a split second, then returned, colder than before. My father's eyes slid over me, unrecognizing, as if I were a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom, Dad, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me?" My mother's lips curled into a smirk. "We didn't want to bother you, Amir. You're always so busy with your jobs." My father laughed, raising his glass. "Yeah, we're celebrating. We don't need your pocket change anymore." The words stung, sharper than any insult I'd ever heard. I looked around, searching for some sign that this was a joke, that someone would step in and say, "Of course you're welcome, Amir. Of course you matter." But all I saw were faces turned away, eyes sliding past me as if I were invisible. I tried again, my voice cracking. "If you've won so much, could you at least help pay off the debts? The ones I took on for you." The room went silent. My father's face darkened, his smile twisting into a sneer. "What did you just say? You ungrateful bastard. I raised you, and now you want money back? Get out." My mother's voice was shrill, cutting through the silence. "It's your duty. You're the son. We don't need you anymore." The whispers started then, rippling through the crowd. "That's the one who always begged for money. So rude, asking his own parents for help." I felt their eyes on me, their judgment, their contempt. I stood there, frozen, humiliation burning through me, until I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked out, the laughter and music swelling behind me, the sound of glasses clinking and people toasting to a future I would never be part of. I got in my car and drove, my hands shaking, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I kept driving, past the empty streets and darkened houses, past the places where I'd once dreamed of a different life. How could they erase me from their lives so easily? After everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar sent home, I was nothing to them. Less than nothing. I was a burden to be discarded, a reminder of a past they wanted to forget. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, the silence pressing in on me, and realized that the family I'd spent my whole life trying to save had never really been mine at all. I don't remember how long I sat in the car after leaving the party. The city lights blurred through the windshield, streaked by the tears I refused to wipe away. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, my parents' laughter, the way my mother's eyes slid past me, the sneers and whispers of people who'd known me since I was a child. I'd never felt so invisible, so utterly erased. I told myself I'd go home, sleep, and figure things out in the morning. But when I finally pulled up to the house I'd grown up in, the place that had been my anchor through every storm, I found the driveway empty and the windows dark. The front door was unlocked, swinging open on its hinges. I stepped inside, calling out for my mother, my father, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice. The living room was stripped bare, no couch, no TV, not even the old family photos that had once lined the walls. The kitchen was empty except for a single chair and a pile of unopened mail. I wandered from room to room, my footsteps hollow on the floorboards, my heart pounding with a dread I couldn't name. In the kitchen, I found a stack of papers, loan documents, credit card bills, all in my name. Red ink circled the due dates, the numbers climbing higher and higher with every page. On top of the pile was a note in my mother's familiar, looping script. "Amir, Mom and Dad are starting a new life now. You're grown up. You can take care of yourself. Don't look for us anymore. Handle the remaining debts on your own. Good luck." I stared at the note, my hands shaking, the words swimming in front of my eyes. It was as if the ground had opened beneath me, swallowing everything I'd ever known. My parents were gone. The house was sold. Every cent I'd sent, every sacrifice I'd made, had vanished with them. All that remained was a mountain of debt and a silence so deep it felt like drowning. I sank to the floor, clutching the papers to my chest, and let the numbness wash over me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the empty walls, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. I thought about all the times I'd longed for a word of praise, a gentle touch, a sign that I mattered. I remembered being 6 years old, standing at the window on my birthday, waiting for my father to come home. He never did. My mother handed me a slice of cake and told me not to make a fuss. "Your father's busy. Don't be selfish." I remembered the school plays, the parent-teacher conferences, the award ceremonies where I stood alone, clutching my certificate, scanning the crowd for a familiar face that never appeared. I remembered the way my mother's voice would harden when I asked for help with homework, the way my father's eyes glazed over when I tried to tell him about my dreams. "You think you're better than us," he'd snap. "Don't forget where you come from." I'd spent my whole life chasing their approval, believing that if I just worked harder, gave more, sacrificed enough, they'd finally see me. But now, sitting in the ruins of my childhood, I realized that day would never come. I was alone. Truly, finally, completely alone. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and despair. I moved back to the motel, the only place I could afford, the walls closing in tighter with every passing hour. I stopped answering calls, stopped checking my email, stopped caring about anything except making it through the next day. The debts piled up, the interest compounding faster than I could keep track. Collection agencies called at all hours, their voices cold and relentless. I started skipping meals, rationing what little money I had left, selling off anything of value just to keep the lights on. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. When I did manage to close my eyes, I dreamed of empty rooms and locked doors, of voices calling my name and then fading into silence. I woke up each morning with a heaviness in my chest, a sense of dread that never left. I stopped going out, stopped talking to anyone. The world shrank to the size of my motel room, the air thick with the smell of old takeout and stale sweat. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I'd remember the boy I used to be, the one who believed in happy endings, who thought love was something you could earn if you tried hard enough. I'd see myself at 8 years old, building a fort out of couch cushions, waiting for my parents to join me. I'd hear my mother's laughter from the other room, the clink of ice in her glass, the sound of the TV drowning out my voice. I'd remember the ache in my chest, the longing for someone to notice, to care. I wondered if I'd ever really matter to them, or if I'd just been a means to an end, a way to pay the bills, to shoulder the blame, to absorb the disappointments they couldn't face themselves. I thought about all the times I'd forgiven them, all the excuses I'd made, all the hope I'd clung to long after it had turned to dust. I wondered if I was broken, if something inside me was fundamentally unlovable. The depression settled over me like a thick, suffocating blanket. I stopped caring about the future, stopped making plans, stopped believing that anything could ever change. I went through the motions, work, eat, sleep, repeat, each day a little harder than the last. The world outside moved on without me, the seasons changing, the city pulsing with life I no longer felt part of. But even in the darkest moments, a small, stubborn spark refused to die. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was pride, maybe it was the last remnant of hope. I told myself I'd survived worse. I told myself I could keep going, even if it was only out of spite. I told myself that one day, somehow, I'd find a way to matter, to someone, somewhere, even if it was only to myself. For now, though, I was abandoned and alone, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life I'd tried so hard to build. And as I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the hum of the motel's ancient air conditioner, I wondered if I'd ever find my way back to the light. I was drifting through my days like a ghost, barely present, barely alive. The world outside my motel room felt distant and unreal, as if I were watching it through thick glass. I went to work on autopilot, my body moving through the motions while my mind floated somewhere far away. I didn't expect anyone to notice. I'd learned long ago that people rarely did. But Mr. Ellis Davenport was different. He was already waiting for me the morning I returned to his mansion, my eyes hollow, my uniform wrinkled from a night spent tossing and turning on a thin mattress. The housekeeper gave me a worried look as I passed, but said nothing. I tried to paste on a smile as I entered Mr. Ellis's room, but my voice cracked when I greeted him. "Good morning, sir. Did you sleep well?" He studied me for a long moment, his pale blue eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "You look like hell, Amir," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Sit down before you fall over." I hesitated, but he waved a trembling hand at the chair beside his bed. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. For a while, we sat in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the oxygen machine and the distant chirp of birds outside the window. Finally, he spoke. "You know, I wasn't always rich. I started out with nothing. Slept on the floor of my first pharmacy, ate canned beans for dinner. But I always had someone in my corner. My grandmother. She believed in me when no one else did." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "Everyone needs someone, Amir. Even you." I felt something in my chest loosen, just a little. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. I tried to brush it off, to change the subject, but he wouldn't let me. "You're not eating," he said. "You're losing weight. You look like you haven't slept in a month. What's going on?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I told him about the debts, the betrayal, the empty house, the note my mother left behind. I told him about the years of sacrifice, the loneliness, the crushing sense of failure. I didn't mean to say so much, but once I started, I couldn't stop. My voice shook, and I was embarrassed by the tears that slipped down my cheeks, but Mr. Ellis didn't judge me. He just listened, his hand resting gently on mine. When I finished, he squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "You've been carrying the world on your shoulders for too long, son. It's time you let someone else help." I shook my head, ashamed. "I don't know how. I don't even know who I am anymore." He smiled, a little sadly. "You're a good man, Amir. That's who you are. And you're not alone, not anymore." From that day on, something shifted between us. Mr. Ellis became more than just my employer, he became a kind of surrogate grandfather, the family I'd always wished for but never had. He started asking about my day, making sure I ate breakfast, insisting that his private chef pack extra meals for me to take home. When I coughed, he pressed expensive supplements into my hand, grumbling about young people who don't take care of themselves. He told me stories about his own struggles, the betrayals he'd survived, the friends who'd let him down. He taught me that dignity wasn't about money or status, but about how you treated people, especially yourself. He noticed the little things. When I was too tired to stand, he told me to sit and rest. When I looked lost, he reminded me that I mattered. He never made me feel like a burden, never demanded more than I could give. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. We spent long afternoons by the window, watching the desert sun sink behind the hills. He'd talk about his late wife, about the mistakes he'd made, about the lessons he'd learned too late. Sometimes, he'd just sit in silence, his hand resting on mine, and that was enough. I found myself looking forward to those moments, to the quiet comfort of his presence. Slowly, the darkness inside me began to lift. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as worthless as I'd been made to feel. Maybe I deserved kindness, too. One morning, as I was helping him into his wheelchair, he looked at me and said, "You remind me of myself when I was young. Stubborn, loyal, always trying to fix everything for everyone else. But you can't pour from an empty cup, Amir. You have to take care of yourself, too." His words stayed with me long after I left his house that day. They echoed in my mind as I drove back to the motel, as I lay awake at night, as I faced the mountain of debts and the silence of my empty phone. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Mr. Ellis had given me something my own family never had, a sense of worth, a reason to keep going. He became my unexpected ally, the light that guided me through the darkest days. And though I didn't know it yet, his kindness would change my life in ways I could never have imagined. The days that followed felt different, as if a window had been cracked open in a room I'd long thought was sealed shut. The air was still heavy with worry, the debts still loomed, and my parents' absence still ached like a bruise, but something had shifted inside me. I found myself looking forward to my mornings at Mr. Ellis's mansion, not just because it was work, but because it was the one place I felt like I belonged. Caring for Mr. Ellis became more than a job, it became a lifeline. I moved through the routines with a new sense of purpose, no longer just going through the motions, but truly present. I'd help him from his bed to his wheelchair, careful not to jostle his fragile frame. I'd prepare his breakfast, making sure the porridge was just the right temperature, and sit with him as he ate, sometimes in silence, sometimes listening to his stories. He'd talk about his childhood in Texas, about the tiny pharmacy he'd started with nothing but a loan and a stubborn belief in himself. He'd tell me about the betrayals he'd survived, the friends who'd turned on him, the nights he'd slept on the floor of his shop, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. "Poverty isn't the scariest thing," he told me one afternoon as we watched the sun set over the desert. "The scariest thing is being stabbed in the back by the people you trust most. But you can survive it, Amir. You can build something new, even from the ashes." His words struck a chord deep inside me. I realized I'd spent so long trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it, so long pouring myself out for a family that only saw me as a means to an end. With Mr. Ellis, I didn't have to prove anything. He saw me, flaws and all, and still treated me with respect. He never made me feel small, never used my kindness against me. He taught me about boundaries, something I'd never learned at home. "You have to protect your heart, Amir," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm. "People will take and take if you let them. You have to decide what you're willing to give, and what you're not." At first, the idea felt foreign, almost selfish. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd lost by never saying no. I started to practice, in small ways, turning down extra shifts when I was too tired, saying no to unreasonable requests from customers, even letting myself rest for an hour in the afternoon if I needed it. Each time, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control of my own life. Mr. Ellis also taught me about dignity. He'd lost so much, his health, his independence, even the respect of some of his own children, but he never let it make him bitter. He faced each day with a quiet grace, never complaining, never asking for pity. "Dignity isn't about what you have," he told me. "It's about how you carry yourself, even when the world tries to knock you down." I watched the way he treated everyone around him, from the housekeeper to the gardener to the delivery drivers. He always said thank you, always looked people in the eye, always remembered their names. I tried to follow his example, to treat myself and others with the same respect. As the weeks passed, I found myself opening up in ways I never had before. I told Mr. Ellis about my dreams, how I'd once wanted to finish my degree, start my own computer repair business, maybe even travel one day. He listened without judgment, encouraging me to imagine a future beyond endless work and sacrifice. "You're more than what you do for other people," he said. "You deserve a life of your own, Amir. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For the first time in years, I started to believe him. I began to picture a life where I wasn't just surviving, but actually living. I imagined waking up in a place that felt like home, working a job that brought me pride, building relationships that were built on mutual respect and care. The idea felt fragile, like a soap bubble that might burst at any moment, but it was there, a glimmer of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. The bond between Mr. Ellis and me deepened with each passing day. He became the grandfather I'd never had, the mentor I'd always needed. He celebrated my small victories, fixing a particularly stubborn laptop, negotiating a better rate with a client, even just making it through a tough week without collapsing. He noticed when I was struggling, offering a kind word or a gentle nudge to take care of myself. He never made me feel like a burden, never expected me to be perfect. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd catch him watching me with a look of pride in his eyes. "You're a good man, Amir," he'd say. "Don't let the world convince you otherwise." Those words became a lifeline, something I clung to on the hardest days. I started to heal, slowly, from the wounds my family had left behind. The pain didn't disappear, but it became easier to bear. I realized that I didn't have to carry it alone. I found solace in the routines of caregiving, in the quiet companionship of someone who truly valued me. I learned that family wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who showed up, who listened, who cared. With Mr. Ellis's support, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I'd thought were lost forever. I started reading again, picking up old textbooks and teaching myself new skills. I saved a little money each month, dreaming of the day I could go back to school. I even allowed myself to hope for friendship, for love, for a future that belonged to me. For the first time, I saw a path forward, a way out of the endless cycle of sacrifice and disappointment. I wasn't just a son, a worker, a debtor. I was Amir. I was worthy of kindness, of respect, of happiness. Mr. Ellis gave me more than a job. He gave me hope. He gave me a new family, one built not on obligation, but on choice. And with that gift, I began to imagine a life beyond servitude, a life where I could finally be free. The morning Mr. Ellis passed away, the world felt strangely still. I arrived at the mansion just as the sun was rising, the desert sky streaked with pale pink and gold. The housekeeper met me at the door, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't need to say a word. I knew. I stood in the grand foyer, the silence pressing in on me, and felt a wave of grief so deep it nearly brought me to my knees. The only real family I'd ever known, gone. The funeral was grand, befitting a man of Mr. Ellis's stature. Hundreds of people came, business partners, politicians, distant relatives I'd never seen before. The casket was draped in white lilies, the air thick with the scent of loss and expensive perfume. I stood quietly in the back, wearing the only black suit I owned, my hands folded, my heart aching. I watched his children and grandchildren in the front rows, all dressed in black, their faces carefully composed. I didn't see a single tear. As the service ended, I overheard their whispers about the will, the inheritance, the Malibu beach house. They spoke of money, not memories. I lowered my head, feeling a pang of sorrow for Mr. Ellis. Even in death, he was surrounded by people who saw him as nothing more than a source of wealth. A week after the funeral, I received a call from Landon Reed, Mr. Ellis's personal attorney. He asked me to come to his office for the reading of the will. My heart pounded as I drove downtown, my mind racing with questions. Why was I being called? I was just a caregiver, a nobody. I told myself it was probably a mistake, that I'd be there only to sign some final paperwork. The conference room was vast and intimidating, filled with polished wood and the heavy scent of leather. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I entered, Mr. Ellis's children, grandchildren, and a handful of distant relatives. Their stares were cold, curious, some openly hostile. I felt out of place, a trespasser in a world that had never been mine. Mr. Reed began reading the will, his voice calm and professional. The mansion to Jace, the eldest son. The subsidiary to Layla, the youngest daughter. Charitable trusts, shares in the company, all divided among the family. Everyone nodded, satisfied, already calculating their windfalls. Then Mr. Reed paused, cleared his throat, and continued. And the final bequest in the will. Mr. Ellis Davenport leaves to Mr. Amir Beckett the sum of $10 million, along with a handwritten letter. The room exploded. Jace leapt to his feet, his face red with fury. Layla let out a sharp, mocking laugh. The rest of the family erupted in outrage, their voices overlapping in a storm of accusation and disbelief. That servant. He must have manipulated Dad. He took advantage of a sick old man. This is theft. I sat frozen, stunned, the words barely registering. $10 million. It didn't feel real. I thought of Mr. Ellis's gentle hand on mine, his words of encouragement, the way he'd looked at me with pride. I remembered the afternoons by the window, the stories, the laughter, the quiet understanding. I wanted to cry, not for the money, but for the love and trust he'd shown me, something I'd never received from my own family. But the Davenport family saw only betrayal. Within hours, they filed a lawsuit, accusing me of undue influence, of coercing Mr. Ellis into changing his will while he was no longer of sound mind. The tabloids pounced, plastering my face across headlines. Greedy caregiver steals $10 million from dead billionaire. Social media erupted with doctored photos, fake messages, and wild speculation. Strangers called me a thief, a con artist, a parasite. My phone buzzed with hate mail, death threats, and demands that I return their money. I lost my job at the IT company. The manager called me in, his face full of regret. I'm sorry, Amir. The director says we can't have this kind of publicity. You have to go. I packed my things in silence, my reputation in ruins, my future uncertain. I started to fear leaving my motel room, bracing myself for the stares, the whispers, the pointed fingers. Even the neighbors looked at me with suspicion, their eyes full of judgment. The legal battle dragged on for months. The Davenport family hired the best lawyers money could buy, spinning stories of manipulation and deceit. They claimed I'd preyed on a vulnerable old man, that I'd wormed my way into his life for a payout. Their attorneys painted me as a schemer, a liar, a gold digger. Every day, I wondered if the world would ever see the truth, or if I'd be forever branded a thief. But I wasn't alone. Landon Reed stood by me, unwavering. He gathered every document, every video, every medical record proving Mr. Ellis's sound mind. He found witnesses, nurses, housekeepers, even Mr. Ellis's private doctor, who testified to our genuine bond. Most importantly, he produced the handwritten letter Mr. Ellis had left for me. I remember the night I finally opened it, my hands trembling. The paper was thick, the handwriting spidery but strong. My dear Amir, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I am sorry for leaving you such a heavy burden. You are the only person in my final years who treated me with kindness that asked for nothing in return. You reminded me that I was still a human being, not just a money-printing machine for my descendants to spend. $10 million is not meant to make you a millionaire. It is the key to your freedom. Freedom from the people who have bled you dry for years. Freedom from the contemptuous looks you get just for being poor. I want you to live the rest of your life according to your own values. Kindness, patience, honesty, and never letting anyone define you by the balance in your bank account. Live with decency, Amir, not for me, for yourself. I was proud to call you my grandson, with all the love of an old man about to leave, Ellis Davenport. I wept as I read those words, the tears soaking the page. For the first time, I felt seen, valued, loved, not for what I could give, but for who I was. But the world didn't care about the truth. The world wanted a villain, and I was the perfect target. Would the world believe I was a thief, or see the truth? The question haunted me as the court date approached, as the headlines grew uglier, as the pressure mounted. I clung to Mr. Ellis's letter, to the memory of his kindness, to the hope that justice would prevail. I told myself I had survived worse. I told myself I could survive this, too. But deep down, I knew that everything, my future, my freedom, my very sense of self, hung in the balance. And all I could do was wait, and hope, and hold on to the final gift Mr. Ellis had given me, the belief that I was worthy of a life of my own. The weeks after the will reading felt like living inside a hurricane. Every day, I woke to a new headline, a new wave of hate, a new reason to question whether I'd ever be free of the past. My name was everywhere, on news tickers, in viral hashtags, splashed across the front pages of tabloids. Caregiver conmen, Billionaire's Betrayal, Theft in the Family. My face, captured in a grainy photo outside the courthouse, became a symbol for everything people wanted to believe about greed and deception. I tried to keep my head down, but there was nowhere to hide. The motel manager eyed me with suspicion, whispering to other tenants when I passed. At the grocery store, people stared, some shaking their heads, others muttering under their breath. I stopped answering my phone, stopped checking my email. The messages were all the same, strangers calling me a thief, old friends asking if the rumors were true, distant relatives demanding a share of the money they thought I'd stolen. The worst were the threats. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night, voices hissing that I'd better give the money back or else. Letters slipped under my motel door, scrawled with curses and warnings. Once, I found my car windshield smashed, a note taped to the dashboard, "You'll pay for what you did." I started sleeping with the lights on, a heavy chair wedged under the doorknob. Fear became my constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach that never loosened. But the legal battle was the real storm. The Davenport family's lawyers were relentless, dragging me through deposition after deposition, twisting my words, painting me as a manipulator who'd preyed on a dying man. They produced doctored emails, fake text messages, even a forged audio clip of me supposedly bragging about my score. Every day, I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap, listening as they tried to erase everything good I'd ever done. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to sign away the inheritance just to make it all stop. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I really was the villain they said I was. Maybe I didn't deserve any of it. Maybe I was just as worthless as my parents had always made me feel. But then I'd remember Mr. Ellis's letter, the way he'd looked at me with pride, the afternoons we'd spent talking about dignity and self-worth. I'd remember his voice, steady and kind. "You're a good man, Amir. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." I clung to those words like a lifeline, repeating them to myself whenever the doubt threatened to swallow me whole. Landon Reed, Mr. Ellis's lawyer, became my anchor. He worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, countering every lie with the truth. He found the housekeeper who'd seen the way Mr. Ellis treated me like family, the private nurse who'd overheard our conversations, the chef who'd packed extra meals for me at Mr. Ellis's request. He unearthed video recordings of Mr. Ellis, lucid and clear, stating his intentions for the will. He even found a handwritten note from Mr. Ellis to his children, explaining why he'd chosen to leave me the money. The trial was grueling. The Davenport family filled the courtroom with their outrage, their lawyers thundering about betrayal and manipulation. The media camped outside, shoving microphones in my face, demanding a confession. I felt exposed, raw, every flaw and mistake I'd ever made dragged into the light. But I refused to back down. I told my story, honestly and without shame. I spoke about my parents, the debts, the years of sacrifice, the loneliness. I described how Mr. Ellis had become my family, how he'd taught me about dignity and boundaries, how he'd given me hope when I had none. I read his letter aloud, my voice shaking but clear. He gave me this gift not because I asked for it, but because he believed I deserved a chance at a life of my own. There were days when I left the courthouse feeling like I'd been beaten bloody, my spirit battered by the weight of so much anger and suspicion. But there were also moments of unexpected grace, a stranger pressing a note of encouragement into my hand, a former coworker sending a message of support, a nurse from the hospital where I'd once been a patient testifying to my kindness and work ethic. Each small kindness was a reminder that not everyone believed the worst. The emotional highs and lows were dizzying. One day, the judge would rule in our favor on a key piece of evidence, and hope would flare in my chest. The next, a new smear article would go viral, and I'd feel the old despair creeping back in. I learned to take each day as it came, to celebrate the small victories, to endure the setbacks without letting them break me. Through it all, I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I realized that I could survive being hated, misunderstood, even threatened. I could survive losing everything, my job, my reputation, my sense of safety, and still hold on to my integrity. I could stand up for myself, even when it felt like the whole world wanted me to fail. The final day of the trial arrived, the courtroom packed with reporters and onlookers. I sat beside Landon, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. The judge read her decision, her voice steady and clear. There is no evidence of undue influence or incapacity. The will is valid. The bequest stands. For a moment, the world went silent. Then the Davenport family erupted in outrage, their lawyers shouting, their faces twisted with fury. but I barely heard them. Relief crashed over me, so intense it left me breathless. I'd survived the storm. I'd fought for justice, for my own worth, and I'd won. As I left the courthouse, the cameras flashing, the questions flying, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. I'd stood up for myself, for the truth, for the memory of a man who'd believed in me. I'd weathered the scandal, the threats, the loneliness, and come out the other side. I was still standing. And for the first time, I believed I deserved to be. The day the judge's decision became final, I woke before dawn, heart pounding, unable to believe it was real. For months, I'd lived in a state of suspended animation, every muscle tensed for the next blow, every thought shadowed by the fear that it could all be snatched away. But now, the storm had passed. The world outside my motel window was quiet, the sky just beginning to lighten, and for the first time in years, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. The money arrived in my account on a morning that felt almost ordinary. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the numbers on the screen, my hands trembling. $10 million. It didn't feel real. I thought of all the nights I'd spent counting coins, rationing food, wondering how I'd make it through another week. I thought of the debts, the bills, the endless demands. And now, with a few keystrokes, I could make it all disappear. The first thing I did was pay off every last cent of the debt my parents had left me. I called the banks, the collection agencies, the loan sharks who'd once threatened to break my legs. I paid them all, in full, and asked for written confirmation that I owed nothing more. The relief was immediate, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. I was free, at least, financially. But freedom, I quickly learned, was more than just a zero balance. It was the ability to choose, to say yes or no, to decide what kind of life I wanted to build. For the first time, I had options. I could have bought a fancy car, traveled the world, lived in luxury. But none of those things called to me. What I wanted most was something simpler, something I'd never really had: stability, purpose, and a sense of belonging. I found a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Phoenix, with a small backyard and a creaky old swing hanging from a mesquite tree. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I painted the walls myself, filled the rooms with second-hand furniture, and planted a few cacti in the yard. Each morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, the air filled with the scent of desert sage. For the first time, I felt at home. With the debts gone and a roof over my head, I turned my attention to the future. I remembered the dreams I'd once had, finishing my degree, starting a business, helping people who'd been where I was. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, determined to finally earn the computer engineering degree I'd abandoned so many years ago. It was strange, sitting in a classroom again, surrounded by students half my age, but I found joy in learning, in challenging myself, in building something new. Inspired by Mr. Ellis's example, I used part of the inheritance to start a small company, Ellis Tech, offering affordable computer repairs and IT support to seniors, low-income families, and caregivers. I hired people who'd struggled like I had: single parents, immigrants, people with gaps in their resumes and stories of hardship. I paid them fairly, offered flexible hours, and made sure they knew they were valued. Every month, I set aside a portion of the profits for the Ellis Davenport Fund, which helped cover emergency expenses for caregivers and low-wage workers in crisis. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it filled me with a sense of pride I'd never known before. I saw the difference we made in people's lives, the relief on a grandmother's face when we fixed her only connection to her faraway grandchildren, the gratitude of a delivery driver who could finally afford a new laptop for his daughter's schoolwork. I felt connected, useful, and, for the first time, respected. But even as my new life took shape, the past lingered at the edges of my mind. I found myself thinking about my parents, about the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, about the pain of their betrayal. I wondered if I could ever truly be free from their shadow, or if some part of me would always be waiting for their approval, their apology, their recognition. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a single act, but a process, a slow, sometimes painful letting go. I stopped checking my mother's social media, stopped replaying the arguments in my head, stopped hoping for a reconciliation that would never come. I allowed myself to grieve, to mourn the family I'd never really had, to accept that some wounds would never fully heal. But I also made a conscious choice not to let that pain define me. I was more than the sum of my scars. I found family in unexpected places. My employees became friends, confidants, a kind of chosen family bound not by blood, but by shared struggle and mutual respect. I reconnected with a few old friends, people who'd reached out during the trial with words of encouragement and support. I even started volunteering at a local community center, mentoring young people who reminded me of myself, lost, uncertain, searching for a place to belong. One autumn afternoon, a woman named Naomi came into Ellis Tech with a battered old laptop. She was a teacher, running free online classes for kids who couldn't afford tutoring. She had a warm smile and a gentle way of listening that made me feel seen. We started talking, first about computers, then about life, then about everything. She didn't care about my past, my family, or the headlines. She cared about who I was, and who I was becoming. We fell in love slowly, quietly, building a life together one day at a time. We married in a small ceremony in my backyard, under the mesquite tree, with a handful of friends and co-workers as witnesses. When our daughter, Leah, was born, I held her in my arms and promised her the one thing I'd always wanted for myself: unconditional love. As the years passed, I found myself reflecting on the meaning of family, forgiveness, and self-respect. I realized that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who show up, who care, who choose you again and again. I learned that forgiveness is not about excusing the harm done to you, but about freeing yourself from the grip of anger and resentment. And I discovered that self-respect is the foundation of everything, that you cannot truly love or be loved until you believe you are worthy. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the old swing in my backyard, Leah asleep inside, Naomi's laughter drifting through the open window, and I'd look up at the stars scattered across the desert sky. I'd think about Mr. Ellis, about the gift he'd given me, not just the money, but the chance to start over, to build a life on my own terms. I'd whisper a quiet thank you to the wind, hoping he could hear me wherever he was. Could I ever truly be free from my past? Maybe not completely. The scars would always be there, reminders of where I'd been and what I'd survived. But I no longer let them define me. I was not just the son who'd been abandoned, the worker who'd been exploited, the man who'd been accused. I was Amir Beckett, husband, father, friend, survivor. I had built something lasting, something good, out of the wreckage of my old life. And in that quiet, starlit peace, I finally understood what Mr. Ellis had meant in his letter. Freedom is not the absence of pain, but the presence of hope. It is the courage to choose yourself, to build a future from the ashes, to believe that you are worthy of love and happiness. I had found my freedom, not in the money, but in the life I had created, the family I had chosen, and the man I had become. Years have passed since the storm that once threatened to swallow me whole. Sometimes, when I wake to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, I have to remind myself that this is real, that the peace I feel is not a dream, but the life I have built, day by day, from the ruins of my past. My home is modest, but it is filled with laughter and warmth. Naomi's voice drifts from the kitchen as she sings to Leah, our daughter, who is now a whirlwind of curiosity and joy. The walls are covered in crayon drawings and family photos, snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and quiet afternoons spent together. There is a swing in the backyard, where Leah likes to soar as high as she can, her laughter ringing out into the desert air. Sometimes I push her and she shouts, "Higher, Baba! Higher!" And I marvel at how light my heart feels, how free. Ellis Tech has grown, slowly but steadily. We are no longer just a repair shop, we are a community. We offer free workshops for seniors, discounted repairs for caregivers, and a safe space for anyone who needs help, no questions asked. Every month, we set aside a portion of our profits for the Ellis Davenport Fund, which is paid for hospital bills, rent, and groceries for people who remind me of the man I used to be. Tired, scared, and in need of a little kindness. I see myself in their eyes, and I remember the promise I made to Mr. Ellis, to live with decency, to use what I have to lift others up. I have learned that family is not always the one you are born into. Sometimes, it is the one you choose, the one you build from trust, respect, and love. My employees are my friends, my confidants, my support system. We celebrate each other's victories, mourn each other's losses, and show up for one another in ways that go far beyond a paycheck. Naomi's parents have become the in-laws I never thought I'd have, gentle, generous people who treat me as their own. And Leah, with her boundless energy and endless questions, is the living proof that love can heal even the deepest wounds. But the past, I have learned, has a way of circling back, testing the boundaries you have set. It happened on a rainy Friday evening, the kind that turns the desert streets slick and silver. I was reading in the living room, Leah curled up beside me, when the doorbell rang, long, frantic, almost desperate. I opened the door to find my parents standing on the porch, older and smaller than I remembered, their faces drawn and anxious. My father's hair was nearly white, his shoulders hunched. My mother's makeup was smudged, her eyes red from crying. They looked at me as if I were their last hope. Without waiting for an invitation, they rushed inside, collapsing onto the sofa. My mother began to wail, her voice rising and falling in the old, familiar way. "Amir, son, we're suffering so much now. Save your parents." My father's voice was rough, pleading. "The money's all gone. The lottery, it's all gone. We have nothing left." They poured out their story, bad investments, friends who'd betrayed them, debts piling up once again. They begged me to let them stay, to help them pay what they owed, to save them as I had so many times before. For a long moment, I just listened, my hands folded in my lap, my heart strangely calm. I saw them clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the giants of my childhood, not as the source of my pain, but as two flawed, frightened people who had never learned how to love without taking. I felt no anger, no desire for revenge. Only a quiet certainty that I could not let them back into my life on their terms. When their voices finally faded, I spoke, my words steady and gentle. "I no longer owe you anything. Every debt, every sacrifice, every drop of sweat I poured into supporting this family ended the day you left me with nothing and disappeared. From that day on, I stopped having parents, and you stopped having a son." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. "What did you just say? You ungrateful wretch. I gave birth to you. I raised you. And now that you have money, you throw your parents out." My father's face twisted with rage. "You'll be struck by lightning. You'll die with no one to bury you. I curse you." But their words no longer had power over me. I stood, calm and unshaken, and told them they needed to leave. When my mother tried to protest, I picked up the phone and began to dial the police. Panic flashed across their faces, and they stumbled out into the rain, hurling curses over their shoulders. I closed the door behind them, locking it with a finality that felt like the closing of a chapter. I stood in the quiet, listening to the rain against the windows, and felt a lightness spread through me. I had not chosen revenge. I had chosen boundaries. I had chosen myself. That night, I sat on the porch, Leah asleep in my arms, Naomi's head on my shoulder. The desert stars shone above us, bright and endless. I thought of Mr. Ellis, of the lessons he had taught me, of the love I had found and the life I had built. I whispered a thank you to the night, to the universe, to the people who had helped me find my way. To anyone listening, anyone who has ever felt alone, abandoned, or unworthy, I want you to know this. You are not defined by the family you were born into, nor by the pain you have endured. You have the right to choose your own path, to build your own family, to set boundaries that protect your heart. Forgiveness is not weakness, and kindness is not surrender. You are worthy of love, of respect, of happiness. I am living proof that it is possible to rise from the ashes, to turn pain into purpose, to find hope where there was once only despair. My story is not unique. It is the story of anyone who has ever chosen themselves, who has dared to believe that they deserve more. As the years go by, I will continue to honor the legacy of those who showed me kindness, to help those who are still searching for their light. I will teach Leah that love is a choice, that family is built, not given, and that the greatest strength lies in choosing to live with dignity and compassion. This is my new beginning. This is my chosen family. And for the first time in my life, I am truly, finally free.